Hello everybody and a very warm welcome to Spa-Francorchamps for this weekend's triple header in the Radical Challenge Championship. We've got a huge field of cars assembled to enjoy the legendary circuit that winds its way through the Ardennes, and already the cars setting off onto their green flag formation lap. This is the first, as I said, of a triple header of races this weekend, two of which, including this one, are over 40 minutes in duration. And then we have also got the 20-minute sprint race tomorrow morning. And we have got a superb four-way championship fight underway as well, with Steve Burgess leading the championship standings. He starts of the Radical Challenge Championship runners sixth overall on the grid, but he's got 20 success seconds to look forward to, whereas his principal championship rival, Dominic Jackson, is in pole position of the Radical Challenge Championship regulars, with his other Burgess's other two main championship rivals, Jerome de Sedler and Christian Jeffrey, right with him on the grid. So we should be in for a thoroughly entertaining weekend of racing alongside the SR3 RSXs that comprise the Radical Challenge Championship field. We have also got a couple of Masters class runners in the form of Andrew Ferguson and Jim Booth, and the driver who will start from pole position is Alex Mortimer, who is in a developmental version of essentially next year's SR8, and so far the R&D looking pretty good for that car, because Mortimer was fastest in qualifying. Now, no sign there on the grid, I have to say, of Andrew Ferguson, so a little bit of a hole where he should be. Otherwise, hopefully they are all present and correct. So of the Challenge Championship regulars, it's the black car of Dominic Jackson that we look for as the front runners of those. The blue car, number 2, Steve Burgess. Christian Jeffrey is in his trademark predominantly white car with the green and yellow flashes, and then Jerome de Sedler, he's got kind of the white side to it, but then the black and red panelling. So that is the runners to look for. The good news is that the weather forecast, at least for today, is somewhat less inclement than it was looking even this morning. The thunderstorms that were forecast to hit about 1 o'clock Central European time this afternoon, i.e. as soon as this race went green, have now been pushed back to later on in the afternoon, and better still, the mist and the cloud that enveloped the circuit early on this morning, certainly for qualifying, has dissipated, so perfect conditions for the drivers to enjoy one of the highlights of the Radical season, the 7-kilometre challenge of the Spa-Francorchamps circuit, and this formation lap turning through the double left-hander at Pouhon, which represents more or less the midway point of the lap before they accelerate towards Fagnes, and will shortly thereafter begin the long blast back towards the pit. So there is the championship leader, Steve Burgess, who has been something of a perennial front runner in Radical racing for many, many years. A driver who is not only very quick, but also seems to marry that with a superb level of consistency. That said, Dominic Jackson, the black number 4 car, was spectacular last year and has been so far this year. Jerome de Sedler, another driver to watch for, only in his second season of motor racing. De Sedler, this is due to his Belgian lineage, essentially his home race, coming up through the Radical Motorsport ladder, having started out in the Radical SR1 Cup. And there, unfortunately, is the car of Andrew Ferguson. Brother Jeremy confers with him, and appears as the team that hoping to give him a push start on his way. So it is a rolling start, of course, the Radical Challenge Championship, which means that they are bunching up behind the pace car now as they turn through the left-handers at Blanchimont. That will then feed them back towards the chicane that concludes the lap, and then the lights on the gantry will change and we'll be going racing for the first of 3 times this weekend. Well, the Spa circuit, always a favourite for the drivers, not just because of its exhilarating layouts and really high-speed turns here, but also the fact that drivers can get close to each other, they can overtake. There are plenty of passing points around the circuit, and therefore it's a track that often gives us some superb racing to look forward to. The bulk of the field, although they do have a mandatory pit stop mid-race, are solo runners, but there are some team competitors a little bit lower down the order to watch for. Peter Tyler, Stuart Mosley and Ted Murray, all starting in the team class. So the pace car peels aside. It's going to be Alex Mortimer who will pace them around through, waiting for the lights to change on the gantry, which they will do momentarily. And away we go in Belgium, and it's a good start from Jim Booth, who's challenging Mortimer as they head towards La Source for the first time. Also, Christian Jeffrey looking to the inside of Jerome de Saedler. As de Saedler almost barges into Booth. They make it through cleanly-ish. Somebody skittering wide on the outside. I rather think that could be Stuart Mosley in the car that he shares with John Corbell as they plunge downhill. And it's of the Challenge Championship regulars, it's Dominic Jackson who's got the early advantage and a little bit of daylight over the rest of his rivals. I think Spencer Bourne's made a very quick start in the dark number 8 car. Indeed he has. He's got Jerome de Saedler right behind him. And also having been shuffled down through the pack a little bit is Steve Burgess, as de Saedler almost being squeezed onto the grass by Bourne as they head in towards Les Combes for the first time. But de Saedler makes the move stick, so it's Jackson from Saedler. Then side by side between Bourne and Jeffrey, and Christian Jeffrey asserts the advantage. Spencer Bourne slithered, and Christian Jeffrey took full advantage. Then a little bit of a gap back to Steve Burgess. The almost mid-90s Ligier livery car of John Mcleod, as ever in the thick of the action midfield. He's got Stuart Mosley bottled up right behind him. They've got Peter Tyler just in front. My apologies, it's Brian Caldwell who's just behind Mcleod. Stuart Mosley carving through a little bit as they arrive into the double left-hander at Pouin for the first time. Swooping through front of the field, Alex Mortimer trying to pull clear. Jim Booth, of course, leading the Masters class, with Andrew Ferguson having started from the pit lane, but already beginning to carve through the field. Mark Crader doing battle a little bit further down the pack. So here is the fight for the lead of the Challenge Championship runners. It's the black car of Dominic Jackson. He's got de Saedler right behind him. Now, the good news for all of these drivers is they've got slightly less time in terms of success seconds in the pits to consider, particularly Jerome de Saedler, who has got no success seconds whatsoever. As we just got a glimpse here of Stuart Mosley looking to try and line up the move on Jason Rishover as they turn into Blanchimont. Brave stuff. Mosley, one of the pro drivers in the field, is also Steve Burgess looking to the inside of Spencer Bourne on the brakes into the chicane. And Burgess glides through, takes the position. And after that brilliant start to the race for Spencer Bourne, he's had a slightly more troubled second half of the first lap and has pretty much lost the ground that he had gained. But here comes de Saedler in pursuit of the black car of Jackson. Christian Jeffrey just behind. Stuart Mosley now making the move on Jason Rishover, swooping around the outside line as they head down through La Source. John Mcleod also picking his way past Peter Tyler. Obviously a lot of racing to go, as it's now the turn of Brian Caldwell to apply the pressure to Tyler. Caldwell, the metallic red liveried car, with Tyler the black car with the fluorescent yellow piping. And then just behind them is Martin Verity, who's coming to the mix as well. And it's Verity who got the run, in fact, coming out of Radion. So this is the bulk of the field. They're all running very closely together. And this is the fight for the lead, effectively, between Dominic Jackson and Jerome de Saedler. Christian Jeffrey in third position. No stranger to European competition, Jeffrey, because he raced on occasion last year in the Radical European Masters. Particularly had a great weekend at the Hungaro Ring. So Mortimer and Booth, as we'd have expected, have rather disappeared at the front of the field. But this is where the action is with regards to the championship points for the Radical Challenge Championship. As now Stuart Mosley in the yellow helmet. You can barely see him. He's right behind Mark Crader. Crader, another experienced European campaigner, also who runs wide through Pouin and just put a wheel on the AstroTurf. Mark Crader, he will rejoin in front of Jason Rishover, but he's lost a little bit of ground as a result of all that. But Crader back into the mix. Stuart Mosley now released to pursue Spencer Bourne. And then we've got this battle between Crader, Rishover, John Mcleod. Another look at it. Mark Crader returns into Pouin. The car just understeers. He gets onto the slippery stuff and very sensibly just decides to take his time with recovering. Can easily bite you otherwise. Right, so here's the fight between Dominic Jackson and Jerome de Saedler. And de Saedler no closer to Jackson over the course of this lap. But as I say, with regards to the success seconds, Dominic Jackson's got 5, Jerome de Saedler hasn't got any, with the 2 men pursuing them, Steve Burgess and Christian Jeffrey, carrying in Burgess's case 20 seconds, Jeffrey 10 seconds. So essentially for Jerome de Saedler, as long as he can stay within 5 seconds of Dominic Jackson, this could work out reasonably nicely for him. As Stuart Mosley looks the inside of Spencer Bourne on the brakes into La Source. And Mosley glides past. Really nice move from Stuart Mosley. He's now got a little bit of daylight to make up to the leading quartet. It's John Mcleod. It's also in the thick of the action further back down. Mosley plants the throttle, climbing out of Eau Rouge through Radion on to the Kemmel Straight. The road rising all the while as they head towards Les Combes. Now here is, meanwhile, Andrew Ferguson carving his way through the field a little bit further back. Now, Andrew, of course, to explain, in the SR8, in a straight line, would expect him to be going a fair bit quicker than the SR3s. So Jackson and de Saedler, they were separated by 7/10 of a second at the end of the first sector, but it's now through this middle sector of the lap, which is about a 60-second sector, where we'll start to see how the gaps ebb and flow between them. In the background, Christian Jeffrey coming under all sorts of pressure from Steve Burgess, and that's allowing the leading duo just to ease clear of Jeffrey and Burgess. Through Pouhon, with the turbulent air kicked from the car in front, Burgess unable to get quite close enough to Christian Jeffrey to then challenge as they arrive into Fagnes. One of the things with these Radical SR3 RSXs is that you can brake incredibly late in them. They've got a superb amount of aerodynamic grip, and therefore the car's braking many, many metres later than you'd think they ought to. As Burgess now gets on the throttle as early as he dares, trying to pursue Christian Jeffrey. Jeffrey, meanwhile, punching that hole in the air in 3rd position. Mosley already well clear of Spencer Bourne. Bourne, who is currently 6th of the point scorers in the race. John Mcleod looks to pursue Mark Crader, having dispatched Jason Rishover. Here comes Andrew Ferguson. And we've got the gap back to Peter Tyler, Martin Verity and Brian Caldwell. The next group of cars headed by Mark Hignett, Elliot Goodman, Peter Brooks, Adrian Watt, all part of that scramble. As they arrive into the braking zone at the chicane to conclude the 3rd lap of the race. At the moment, they're just now beginning to settle into a little bit of a rhythm as Andrew Ferguson looks to the inside John Mcleod on the brakes into La Source. Not entirely convinced John saw him, but Andrew should be able to pull clear as they run downhill. As Ferguson making the move on Jason Rishover. So that last lap, Dominic Jackson pulled out a 1/10 of a second over Jerome de Saedler. Let's see if de Saedler's got it back through the first sector as they conclude it. Now he has 7/10 of a second adrift, but the real man on the move is the driver in the yellow helmet there, Stuart Mosley, who has scythed up onto terms with Christian Jeffrey and Steve Burgess. While John Mcleod got his mirrors full of the dark and silver car of Jason Rishover, which is very similar to the dark and silver car of Mark Crader. Crader busy pursuing Ferguson. Ferguson trying to chase down Spencer Bourne. And we're almost at 1/4 race distance already. They've got the mid-race pit window to consider. It's when the slight element of strategy will begin to come into play. As Bourne turns into Pouhon. See how the track's rubbered in a little bit over the course of the morning. The marbles just beginning to accumulate to the side of the racing line. And then on the brakes into Fagnes. Good scraps really going on throughout the field. And Jerome de Saedler's had not a brilliant lap. He's now 1.8 seconds adrift of Dominic Jackson. We've not followed his progress, but de Saedler losing a little bit of ground. Stuart Mosley, meanwhile, is right with Steve Burgess and Christian Jeffrey when we next see the pair of them, as Andrew Ferguson blasts past Spencer Bourne. and the Masters class, which races in the Radical European Masters. Chance for the drivers who want to make the step up to international competition to do so in some very potent and powerful machinery. The SR8, superb piece of kit, as indeed is the SR3. But whereas the SR3, you've got a lot of aerodynamic grip relative to the power of the car to play with. In the SR8, it's a very fine balance between the two. So here's the fight now for third. Christian Jeffrey has got Steve Burgess with him, and Burgess is now being given the hurry along by Stuart Mosley. Mosley, who'll be handing over to John Caldwell mid-race, trying to give John as nice an advantage as possible to inherit. As Mosley gets into that turbulent air behind Burgess, but keeps his foot in through Radiant onto the Kemmel Straight, and Stuart Mosley may well be able to challenge now. Burgess has got to think very carefully about where he wants to place the car, but possibly to no avail, because already Mosley alongside Burgess as they head towards the braking zone at Les Combes. Mosley brakes desperately late, dives through, snatches fourth. Burgess gets demoted to fifth, which is not ideal for Steve Burgess in terms of track position. And also, with an eye towards success seconds, it's even less ideal for Steve Burgess. That said, he's come into today's race with a reasonably hefty championship lead. And therefore, as long as he can net a good haul of points from the race, then all is far from lost, particularly this being the first of three races for the weekend. So now it's the turn of Mosley to apply the pressure to Christian Jeffrey. Jeffrey was pretty much unflappable under threat from Steve Burgess. They've also got Jerome de Seidler, I would suggest, beginning to edge towards them, because the last lap for de Seidler was a 2 minutes 28.0. Christian Jeffrey a good couple of tenths quicker. Stuart Mosley a good couple of tenths quicker again relative to Christian Jeffrey. So this could be quite an intriguing battle as Mosley settles into the toe behind Christian Jeffrey towards Blanchimont. It's a brave man who overtakes into Blanchimont, but Stuart Mosley is just that. Here comes Andrew Ferguson, meanwhile, who's also joining himself into the party. He's trying to latch on to Jim Booth, but Jim already the best part of 15 seconds up the road or so from this scrap as Mosley to the inside of Christian Jeffrey, and Stuart Mosley goes for the move. He's got the track position. Can he get it squared off on the exit? Yes, he can. And Mosley up into third place. Andrew Ferguson's deficit to Jim Booth is exactly 15 seconds, so that is going to be worth keeping an eye on. Jim Booth lapping in the 2 minute 25 second bracket, Andrew Ferguson the 2 minute 23 second bracket. So at that rate of capture, it could be on for Andrew Ferguson to have reeled in Jim Booth. But of course, there are the mid-race pit stops and driver changes to contend with in that instance. Now here's another look at it. Really smart drive from Andrew Ferguson. He just left the space for Stuart Mosley to make the move that he needed to. And Mosley to the inside on the brakes into the bus stop chicane. Glides past Christian Jeffrey, sets off in pursuit of Jerome de Seidler. A trio of cars for third, fourth and fifth pick their way through Les Combes, downhill towards the Bruxelles hairpin. Incredibly steep downhill radius to the hairpin. The corner finishes many meters below where it starts. Goes through the complete 180 degrees. And then the left-hander with no name that feeds them on downhill towards Pouhon, the double left-hander. Burgess pilots his way in, holds the racing line, can't do an awful lot about Christian Jeffrey. Stuart Mosley already trying to break clear of Jeffrey. His next target is Jerome de Seidler. Here is the Radical Challenge Championship race leader, though, Dominic Jackson. And Jackson, who, after having to get his elbows out in the first lap of the race, has been unheaded thereafter. And he's been able to build a buffer of about 2 seconds over Jerome de Seidler. So this could get absolutely fascinating in the pits, because all things being equal through the pit stops, there's every possibility here that de Seidler, with 5 seconds fewer in the pits, might just get the leap on Jackson, which point they emerge. Meanwhile, Andrew Ferguson looking every which way to pass Jerome de Seidler. Not sure de Seidler was totally clear there. that Andrew Ferguson was running in a Masters class car, because he certainly really tried to defend the position. The fluorescent yellow wingtips, by the way, the indication as to whether or not the car is running in the Masters class. And Andrew Ferguson, he's now just 11 seconds back from Jim Booth. So that chase is on. Dominic Jackson, meanwhile, has got Andrew Ferguson right behind him. This is sort of a phony war type scrap, really, because through goes Andrew Ferguson. And Ferguson, 10.5 seconds back from Jim Booth. He's going to try and chase him down. Meanwhile, De Seydler and Jackson busy fighting with each other. Or trying to. Dominic Jackson, a buffer of about 2.8 seconds over Jerome De Seydler. And De Seydler not getting any closer. Stuart Mosley, though, really trying to reel him in as well. They tip their way down through Pouhon once more. Further back, the order relatively stable. Stage of the race, and now they've settled into an order. It's really a case of trying to drive away from each other. Question mark as to the progress that Stuart Mosley can make. He's now 1.9 seconds back from Jerome De Seydler. 23 minutes to run. So they turn in towards Blanchimont. There you see the power differential of the SR8. And Ferguson 9.3 seconds back from Jim Booth. That gap is being whittled away all the while. Dominic Jackson through the bus stop chicane. Go out to the drivers, inform them how much longer there is to go. And here are the leading trio then. And Stuart Mosley is rapidly hoisting himself up towards De Seydler. Now, the pace of Stuart Mosley, 2 minutes 26.0, is 2 seconds lap quicker as well than the race leader Dominic Jackson. So there's every possibility here that Mosley might yet get himself in to lead the race. The problem being that the further up the order you get, the harder it is to overhaul people. Meanwhile, John Mcleod to the inside of Mark Crader. That elevates Mcleod to 10th place in the race overall. But once you discount the Masters class cars, that actually puts him 7th amongst the Challenge Championship point scorers. So Mcleod will be reasonably happy with his efforts thus far, but Mark Crader is going to have a chance to chase him along the Kemmel Straight now, as they're all closing up onto Spencer Bourne too. And Bourne, having had that phenomenal first lap of the race, sliding back a little bit thereafter. The pit lane, meanwhile, is open, so that's where the element of strategy now is going to start to come into play as well. Nice three-way tussle this. It's taking place 12 seconds adrift from Steve Burgess. As we were saying at the top of the race, we've got that leading quartet in the championship who are certainly on the basis of the race thus far, pretty, with the exception of Stuart Mosley, who's really mixing it with them, the class of the field. We've got a track limits flag for Stuart Mosley. Now here is Peter Tyler, coming under pressure from Martin Verity, and that's more than pressure from Martin Verity. That's a pass from Martin Verity. Through Fagna. Mcleod using all the curb a little bit more into the Cour-Poulfrère, then out of Stavelot, and the blast towards Blanchimont, picking up the route of the original Spa road circuit. And this section of the circuit indeed used to be public roads up until a few years ago, before it became a permanent race course. Charles Blanchimont, blind entry to the left-hander, feeds them out, continuing to keep the foot in all the way to the braking zone for the chicane. They all close up on each other. Meanwhile, in the Masters class, Andrew Ferguson now 5.8 seconds back from Jim Booth. Mcleod might fancy his chances a bit of a run here at Spencer Bourne. Is he close enough to challenge into La Source? It's not quite the Bourne ultimatum, but it was certainly a little bit of a look there from John Mcleod. And now he drives strong alongside the exit, almost contact between the pair of them. There was a little bit of smoke as Bourne shuts the door, and that immediately puts Mcleod under pressure from Mark Crader. This is brave stuff into Eau Rouge, and Crader thought about it for a moment, backs out of it at the last minute, and that, unfortunately for Mark Crader, may well cost him as they climb out of Radion, because he just had to back out of that manoeuvre. Here's another look at the... Now, was there contact as they came out? Yes, there was a little bit of rubbing. And this is the problem for Mark Crader. As he lost that momentum, it brought Jason Rishover into the mix as well. Rishover in pursuit of Crader. Superb fight. These four cars really leaving no questions unanswered as they come down into the hairpin, swooping on downhill in towards the left-hand. Now the pit lane is open. They've got to go past the pit lane open board before they can actually peel into the pits and make their pit stop, which is why nobody's darted in immediately. So we will anticipate to see a few of them peeling in at the end of this, the 9th lap of the race. We're currently following the fight from 9th position on track, but really 6th position in the points race overall, because this is Alex Mortimer, who was quickest in qualifying. He's in the developmental car for next year, and he's made a slightly different line on the way through Bruxelles. Then now here, the pit lane are a buzz, and Andrew Ferguson had caught right up to the tail of Jim Booth. So really great stuff from Andrew Ferguson, starting from the pit lane, let's not forget. So Jim Booth, he is going to do the whole race single-handedly. Here's another look at them coming into the pit lane. Oh, and Andrew Ferguson very, very nearly collecting Jim Booth. In fact, he gives him a little bit of a tap on the way and saying, come on, the pit lane speed limit doesn't start until you're a bit further along the pit lane. Dominic Jackson, Stuart Mosley continuing on their way. Jerome de Sadler and Steve Burgess are getting their pit stops out of the way now. So this is the fight for first and second in the Radical Challenge Championship. And then Christian Jeffrey also yet to pit in a little bit further adrift down the Kemmel Straight. Now, Stuart Mosley, of course, will be handing over to John Caldwell mid-pit stops. Jerome de Sadler, there he is, single-handedly. Also, Tom Gladys has taken over from Peter Tyler, and Gladys, a driver who's been very quick in radicals over the years, also raced in the Motorsport Vision version of the Formula 2 Championship a few years back. Spencer Bourne in the pits, fires the car, and these pit stops can feel like an eternity. Without success seconds, they're only static for 45 seconds, but when you're used to racing at in excess of 200 kilometers per hour around the Spa-Francorchamps circuit, that feels like a very, very long time indeed. All the while, the race clock is ticking downward. This gaggle of cars will need to come in probably at the end of this lap with shy of 16 minutes left on the clock. But for Dominic Jackson, this has been a job well done. I guess the question is going to be, with Jerome de Sadler, of course, is the sort of outlap that he can put in relative to an in-lap from Dominic Jackson. Oh, and a problem there, and that is Jason Rishover, who has had some sort of a moment over at Pouhon, looks to rejoin as both Jackson and Mosley peel into the pit lane now. So expectation is that the bulk of the field will come complete their pit stops on this occasion. Christian Jeffrey, however, continuing onward for one more tour of the circuit. Stuart Mosley jumps out of the car. John Caldwell will get in. Mosley just adjusts the belts, straps his co-pilot into the cockpit. Now here is Jerome de Seidler. He is essentially racing the static car in the pits of Dominic Jackson. This is the fight for race victory. De Seidler is really on it on this outlap, as well he needs to be. He was about 3 seconds adrift of Jackson at the point at which they pulled into the pits. But as I say, by my admittedly somewhat shonky maths, he should, all things being equal through the pit stops, get a little bit of an overlap. But as we saw when Jim Booth and Andrew Ferguson pitted in, unless you can easily give away a couple of seconds just on pit entry. So Dominic Jackson remains in the pit lane as de Seidler accelerates through now. Contrabox doesn't quite afford us the view of Jackson's car, as meanwhile Mark Crader and Steve Burgess do battle, and Crader allows Burgess to scythe past him. So here comes de Seidler, the out signal for Jackson. There is Jackson, who would appear to have retained his lead. We'll see on the long shot as they head towards Eau Rouge. But Jackson out of the pits, and it appeared as if there was a black Radical SR3 up the road ahead of Jerome de Seidler as they accelerated on the way. Yes, there is Dominic Jackson. So Jackson, through the pit stops with those quick in-laps, has retained the advantage over Jerome de Seidler. So that very much a case of job done for Dominic Jackson. De Seidler then in second, and this is the fight for third. John Caldwell it is who has got third position. Jeremy Ferguson, meanwhile, has been able to get the jump on Jim Booth to lead the Masters class. So Jeremy Ferguson going strongly. He's, of course, got the longer pit stop as well for the Masters class runners. So the order, as is always the case through the pit stops, gets slightly jumbled, but it is number 4, Dominic Jackson, who is effectively the race leader. This is the driver who was effectively second place, Jerome de Seidler, and then John Caldwell, currently in third, but Christian Jeffrey only now has elected to make his mid-race pit stop, so that will put a little bit of a different complexion on things. And we've got Rod Goodman, who is just in behind, but Rod hasn't yet made his pit stop, so we can slightly discount him. That's a fair bit of ground back to Spencer Ball, John Mcleod and Steve Burgess, of course, who is recovering from 20 success seconds. Now, unfortunately, there is a case of the Bourne identity for Spencer Bourne, and that is that he's been spotted through going over the pit exit blend line, and so has to have a drive-through penalty. That's the look at Jeremy Ferguson to the inside of John Caldwell. So Dominic Jackson leads the way. Christian Jeffrey still static in the pits. So Jackson leads. De Seidler second, but the fight for third could be a really good one here, because John Caldwell and Christian Jeffrey going to be more or less together on the track by the time this is all shaken through. So that could be rather good fun, as we've still got just over a quarter of the race to run, and Dominic Jackson stretching clear at the front of the field. His lead over Jerome de Seidler out to 5.7 seconds. But then it's really a question of behind, if it's going to be Christian Jeffrey or John Caldwell for third amongst the Radical Challenge Championship contenders. And it is Christian Jeffrey who's got the advantage over John Caldwell, and in fact, a reasonable advantage for Jeffrey, 3.8 seconds. And past experience suggests that that is likely to extend. Now, Steve Burgess, meanwhile, is right with John Mcleod. So the 14 and 2 cars busy having a good scrap a little bit lower down the order. Here, meanwhile, is Alex Mortimer. Now, Mortimer will be the driver who, all things being equal, in 10 minutes' time, will take the checkered flag. Now, where Mortimer's progress is important is the point at which Mortimer triggers the checkered flag and triggers the last lap of the race. Because that might have a bearing on some of the catches and passes going on further down the order. For Dominic Jackson, he just needs to make sure that the next 4 or 5 laps unfold without any undue drama. The scythes through Blanchimont. We've also got another drive-through penalty for the pit lane exit blend line. That is Brian Caldwell. So here is second place man Jerome de Sadler. Now de Sadler with a good advantage over Christian Jeffrey, about 12 seconds or so. So that's potentially going to be some solid points here. Meanwhile, it's the battle between Steve Burgess and John Mcleod, and Burgess going for the move into Pouot. I think Mcleod recognising he sort of had to concede that, and in fact running out pretty wide as a result. So Burgess, all things being equal, is looking set fair for 4th or 5th in the Supersport class, because he's going to move up to 4th in the class once Spencer Bourne has his drive-through penalty. And he's only about 5 set, and Bourne doing that penalty now, according to our timing screen, with then John Caldwell just 5.5 seconds ahead of Steve Burgess. So that's probably the battle to watch for, is the one for 4th and 5th in the Challenge Championship, because Dominic Jackson, Jerome de Sadler and Christian Jeffrey, at the moment, relatively well consolidated in those podium places. It's very rare to see these radicals encountering mechanical problems, and these drivers at the front of the field, they're all of a level where the mistakes are very few and far between. That said, the Spa-Francorchamps circuit is one that can bite. If it goes wrong here, it can go wrong in a fairly substantial way. Jeremy Ferguson, then the leader of the Masters class, and got the jump on Jim Booth through the pit stops. For Jeremy and Andrew Ferguson, starting from the very, very back of the grid, they've done a great job of picking their way through the traffic to lead the class. Jerome de Sadler then, 13 or so seconds clear of Christian Jeffrey. Christian Jeffrey's only about 11 seconds clear of Steve Burgess, with John Caldwell between the pair of them, so feels like that's a lot to chase down in 7 minutes or thereabouts. And John Caldwell, this does put the cat amongst the pigeons. There's a 5-second time penalty now for John Caldwell, 4th in the class, because he has picked up a 5-second time penalty for track limits, which on adjusted time promotes Steve Burgess already up ahead of John Caldwell, as Mark Crader looks to try and line up the move on John Mcleod. It's not quite close enough to challenge into Blanchimont. Certainly not the first part of it. Maybe through the second part and in towards the chicane. Now is Crader feeling brave enough to challenge to the inside line. Mcleod, though, eases across to the middle of the road. He's going to make this be done the hard way for Mark Crader. And there's not quite a car's width for Crader. So now Crader gets on the power a little bit earlier, maybe, than John Mcleod, as the pair of them accelerate towards La Source. Again, Mcleod covers the inside line. Crader looks to the outside line. He might hope to get the undercut here on the exit and carry the momentum downhill towards Eau Rouge. But Mcleod was wise to that trick, also got on the power very early, so Crader still tucked right underneath the rear wing of John Mcleod as they hit the compression at the bottom of the hill, climb out of Eau Rouge through Radion on to the Kemmel Straight, and this has been really well defended from John Mcleod. But again, Crader's got a good run. Meanwhile, in the foreground, Steve Burgess, on adjusted time, is already ahead of John Caldwell, trying to make the move stick on the track. As again, a move from Crader. He looks to the outside of Mcleod as they get on the brakes to Lecom. Once more, Mcleod takes advantage of the short braking distance of the Radical SR3. He's able to just about withstand the pressure as Burgess, brilliant move from Steve Burgess around the outside of John Caldwell into the Bruxelles hairpin. Forced Caldwell to scrub the speed off to take that tight inside line and just leapt around the outside. Really nicely executed by Burgess. And now he can set off literally 11.5 seconds down the road behind Christian Jeffrey. Now for John Caldwell, he's not really 5 seconds clear, is he, on John Mcleod and Mark Crader? So there's a good chance here that John Caldwell, by the time the results have been adjusted somewhat, is going to be further down the pecking order. That said, he and Stuart Mosley are the foremost of the teams at the moment, with Tom Gladys down in 18th place and Dan Crossley in 22nd. It's just 4 minutes to run. So I think they will probably have time for 2 more laps after the one they're about to start, relative to the track position of Alex Mortimer. We might sneak 1 more lap than that in, as still Mark Crader continues his pursuit of John Mcleod. Again, Mcleod just makes sure he's parked in the middle of the road, wants to make Crader do the hard work. Crader not quite as close as he was on the previous occasion. So Jeremy Ferguson rather, is past Dominic Jackson. But Jackson has got more or less the length of the Kemmel Straight between himself and Jerome de Sailor. It's now a 10-second advantage for Dominic Jackson, and that is looking fairly emphatic in the Radical Challenge Championship. Jeremy and Andrew Ferguson poised for Masters class victory. Alex Mortimer's just been through to start his penultimate lap of the race, unless Mortimer were to completely back things off on this lap. Still, Mcleod and Crader going at it, and they're catching John Caldwell as well fairly rapidly, even with this defence from John Mcleod. And certainly you get the feeling, if Mark Crader were able to find his way past Mcleod, that he would then really be able to push on and challenge Caldwell. As they all hit on the brakes downhill into Bruxelles. Here's the move from Jeremy Ferguson, using the straight line advantage of the Masters class car to very, very good effect. And also, more importantly, perhaps not really intruding on Dominic Jackson's lap whatsoever. Oh, and a mistake from John Caldwell. He runs wide through Pouon, and that is going to promote both Mcleod and Crader. Caldwell rejoins. And it's always the challenge there at Pouon. If you just get a little bit wrong on the turn-in, you really lose both elements of the corner and a whole heap of track position. That's exactly what happens to John Caldwell. So he was already going to lose those places on adjusted time, but now gets shuffled down to effectively 7th place of the points-paying positions. He's got a good 10 seconds or so over Marcello Maracciotto. Caldwell's got to make sure that he doesn't really concede too much time to Maracciotto from here on in, as Crader now gets another good run coming out of Blanchimont, looking to challenge John Mcleod. Once more Mcleod to the middle of the road. Crader looks to the outside, and Mark Crader really trying to force it. Now Mcleod's going to go in tight. And has he been able to block out Crader on the exit? I think he has. Crader couldn't quite anticipate the throttle as early as he wanted to, as the pair of them sprint through. Start, by my reckoning, their penultimate lap of the race, just because of the track position of Alex Mortimer. So out of La Source, down towards Eau Rouge. I think for John Mcleod, the checker flag can't come a second soon enough, as Alex Mortimer, in fact, peels into the pit lane. So that means that, for my money, as Mortimer rolls down the pit lane, essentially out of proceedings, they are into the final lap of the race, and essentially the checkered flag will go out when Jeremy Ferguson crosses the line, as Mcleod able to withstand the pressure from Crader once more along the Kemmel straight. He's found that putting the car in the middle of the road to be really somewhat effective, as downhill now towards Bruxelles. Mcleod just needs to keep a good line, which he does. Crader not able to do an awful lot about him as the clock ticks to 0. So the checker flag awaits the point at which they arrive at the start and finish area, and Jeremy Ferguson, Dominic Jackson not too far adrift. So into Fania. Pick their way through the S-bend, and the checker flag goes out. Jeremy Ferguson has taken the flag. And here is Dominic Jackson. So Dominic Jackson wins the Radical Challenge Championship. Superb performance from Jackson, with second position will go to Jerome de Seidler. De Seidler, a really fine performance for that second place. Looking particularly feisty in the early stages, fighting for track position. Oh, and problems for Brian Carswell late on. And, well, he rolled the dice in the double six car. On that occasion, it came up snake eyes, as Christian Jeffrey then takes third place in the Radical Challenge Championship, and Steve Burgess to fourth position. John Mcleod has managed to hold off Steve Burgess. Great drive from Mcleod to keep Burgess at bay, with then John Caldwell across the line. And he will hope to have maintained enough of a buffer over Marcello Marateiotto, which he has by half a second and no more than that, once the penalties get filtered through, as the rest of the field all come across the line to take the checker flag. So Jeremy and Andrew Ferguson winning the Masters class, Dominic Jackson winning the Radical Challenge Championship element of the race, setting us up for what promises to be a thoroughly entertaining brace of races that we've got to look forward to tomorrow. A 20-minute and a 40-minute race, of course, forming tomorrow's programme. And we will be in action for the 20-minute race with the green flag lap at 10:25 local time, and then the 40-minute race getting underway with the green flag lap at 4:10 local time. So make sure that you join us for both of those. It's the last couple of cars coming through to cross the line. Unfortunately, Brian Caldwell, having had that spin that we saw, I rather fear has done a little bit of damage to the car, because he's limping through. He's now taken the checkered flag. So look then at the results then, with Jeremy Andrew Ferguson victorious in the Masters class. Dominic Jackson, though, winning the Radical Challenge Championship from Jerome de Seidler and Christian Jeffrey. Steve Burgess in fourth, John Mcleod in fifth after that great scrap with Mark Crader. John Caldwell and Stuart Mosley ahead of Marcello Marateiotto, Spencer Bourne, Adrian Watt and Martin Verity. The other good news is that they all started and they all safely made it through without anybody suffering undue drama, with Elliot Goodman ahead of Peter Tyler and Tom Gladys, then Peter Brooks, Mark Hignett, Jason Rishover having some adventures. So look back then at the best of the race, and off the line, Christian Jeffrey and Jerome de Seidler really challenging into La Source for the first time. All got very, very tight. Fortunately, they avoided contact with Brian Caldwell, pushed out wide. The early stages, Spencer Bourne in the thick of the action with Christian Jeffrey, as was Steve Burgess, as Andrew Ferguson carving through from the very back of the field. Stuart Mosley, another driver who was upwardly mobile through the first half of the race, making that move on Spencer Bourne, and then again a few moments later to the inside of Christian Jeffrey. John Caldwell taking over from Stuart Mosley in the second half of the race, in the thick of the action as Steve Burgess was working his way up through the field. So a Ferguson victory in the first race of the Radical Challenge Championship for the Masters class this weekend, but it was Dominic Jackson who netted the points haul, the superb win for him. So we'll be back tomorrow morning as the Radical Challenge Championship weekend continues. Until then, it's goodbye from Spa.